Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Gloria Gavin with Resin. I'm one of the exhibitors here at AWE today, the e-commerce track and sessions. We're starting off this morning with the session Projecting the Future, Coexisting Seamlessly with Technology. And our speaker today is Nicole Tan, who is Creative Technologist at Wayfair Next, which is the R&D division of Wayfair. Before we get started, a few quick housekeeping notes. We'll have time for a short Q&A, so please feel free to send us your questions via the chat. And we'll take a few minutes at the end of Nicole's presentation. AWE would like to remind you to watch the Augie Awards, which will be on the main live stream on the 29th at 11:50. And as a reminder, all sessions will be recorded and available. And finally, we'd like to thank our titanium sponsors, HP, Microsoft, Qualcomm, and Unity, and our gold sponsor as well, Plug XR, for all of their support. And with that, let's get started. Over to Nicole.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. And thank you, AWE, for having me. So when I was a little kid, my bedroom had glow-in-the-dark stars overlaid on the ceiling. I distinctly remember turning on and off the lights to see the stars glow. That in itself was magical, but what was even more magical was when my dad brought a small projector home and we would play movies on the ceiling. I felt during those moments that I was viewing those movies among the stars. So eventually our necks would get really tired of craning up to look at the ceiling, but I still remember that feeling of magic distinctly. That was a long, long time ago, but at its simplest, that was a mixing of two worlds. The physical layer of stars that acted as the backdrop and the digital layer of the movie that played over them. The wonder of projection mapping to me is how it allows these two discrete worlds, physical and digital, to intertwine. So before I get started talking about what projection mapping is, I wanted to introduce myself. So hi, my name is Nicole, and I'm a creative technologist on the research and development team called Next within the furniture e-commerce company Wayfair. The term creative technologist just means that we work a little differently from that of a typical software engineer. We don't specialize in a single language or stack, and we have to prototype and pitch our projects, which mostly deal with some sort of emerging technology. It feels like a never-ending hackathon, and our projects range from short-term prototypes that are handed off to teams for production to much more far-ranging ideas like, how can you feel textures on your phone? Or what does the future of home look like? One of the things that really excites me about getting up every day is thinking about the ways that we can creatively change how we interact with technology. So the way we currently interact with most technology is at the expense of a physical experience. We've traded most of our tangible interactions for screen-based ones. My previous story about the glow-in-the-dark stars, however, reminds me that there are other combinations of technology that can potentially spark some new interactions. If we think about how technological trends have shifted over the years, we've moved from picturing the computer as an anomaly, a foreign device with a huge learning curve that we have to overcome. The keyboard and mouse were these ways to help us interact with technology. But as time has passed, all of this has now become integrated with our day-to-day. Most of us can't go an hour without checking our phones. Interfaces have changed from much clunkier devices to something much, much more natural. There have been numerous experiments with ways to make design more human, from voice to utilization of gestures on your phone to chatbots and everything in between. But the most natural interaction is one without a screen. Being able to interact with these digital objects in the real world is the dream. So what is spatial augmented reality and why is it important? Spatial augmented reality layers computer-generated enhancements on top of your existing space. That definition that I just gave could work just as well for mobile augmented reality, except for this one addition, which is that there's no screen or phone present. This means it can be great for large venues like theme parks and planetariums because it gives you the ability to create these immersive, all-encompassing and shared experiences. A common example of projection mapping is the fireworks show at the end of every day at Disney, where they overlay characters on the castle. So I mentioned before that projection mapping is primarily known for its use cases in large venue settings, but there are so many other ways that we can incorporate this technology. So on the left here is the box, which is an extremely famous example of projection mapping. So it's a short film that was created by Bot and Dolly, and it's a completely live performance that captures the most awe-inspiring elements of robotics, projection mapping, software engineering, and artistic vision. It's a manifestation of what we believe projection mapping could and should be, which is an enhancement of the physical space, to the point where you believe that these illusory visualizations that look 3D are actually real and tangible. The experience on the right is one created by Team Lab in Shanghai. They're an international art collective that's created a number of digital art exhibitions that have been seen around the world and look to transcend the boundaries between art and people. By creating interactive experiences, viewers aren't just onlookers, but become active parts of the artwork. This is enabled by the freedom provided by projection mapping to create experiences that are all immersive and shared. So the two experiences shown here focus on natural interactions. On the left, the interactive wall combines spatial augmented reality with conductive ink and sound to create an experience where you can play musical instruments. And on the right, the digital playground looks to answer the questions of how to help people interact the way we did before technology existed. Projections will respond to participants throwing foam balls at them, which means that they can prevent meteors from colliding with the moon, or team up to push an astronaut into the moon's orbit. Both of these showcase how technology that isn't confined to a screen can help create more tangible and natural experiences. But besides just entertainment, spatial augmented reality has its uses elsewhere, like in art conservation, seen in both of these examples, which were created with the help of the MIT Media Lab. On the left is a project called Color the Temple in the Met's Egyptian wing a few years ago, and it reimagines what the Temple of Dendur might have looked like 2,000 years ago with all its colors and even some added animations. The example on the right shows a group of paintings called the Harvard Murals by Mark Rothko. After excessive exposure to natural light, the paintings had faded and changed color, and a typical restorative process would have been to physically retouch over the varnish. The paintings, however, lacked this varnish, so any changes made would have been irreversible. So instead, the team used projection mapping and light to restore this lost color by first determining what the original colors were, writing algorithms to map the current state of the murals to their target state, and then projecting the corrective colors onto their corresponding locations. Projection mapping can thus be used to help showcase art as it was meant to be seen, as well as prevent otherwise irreversible damage to it. So the dish, also known as the digital immersive showroom, is one of my favorite all-time uses of projection mapping. It was created by Walt Disney Imagineering, and it's a room that displays a projection map version of a ride all around you, allowing for a pre-visualization of a Disney ride experience. With the help of a tracked hat, it can allow for an experience accurate for your viewpoint. And that accounts for something that I've honestly never thought about, which is how the height difference between a child and adult can drastically change the ride experience. So this prototyping and visualization tool allows adjustments like that to be made in a collaborative space way before construction even begins. So as I mentioned earlier, I work as a creative technologist within the research division at Wayfair. We've prototyped a few experiences involving projection mapping, and I'd like to share a bit about the process as well as the research we've done in the field. So Wayfair is an e-commerce company, but a few months ago, as an experiment, we launched our first physical store, and my team had the chance to prototype some installation pieces, one of which is shown on the screen now. This was an idea we had for a front of store projection map experience for custom upholstery, which is a section on Wayfair where you can choose from hundreds of different swatch options for your furniture piece of choice. Instead of holding up a small texture swatch and trying to imagine what it would look like on the rest of the chair, why not be able to see the entire catalog at once projection mapped onto the chair? So how did we go about creating this? Projection mapping onto an arbitrary surface like this chair involves overlaying a 2D flat plane on top of a 3D object. Because of this, there's only one exact position in which the image will not look distorted, which is when the image depicts the view onto the surface from the projector's position. Another way to kind of think about this is the projector being a virtual camera in the virtual space. The lens properties of the projector, for instance, field of view, should match that of the virtual camera. With that in mind, to create our projection map chair, the first thing we did was use photogrammetry, also known as 3D scanning, to recreate our physical chair as an accurate 3D model. We then placed this virtual 3D double inside our Unity scene, making it easy to manipulate the object, easily add and switch textures on the 3D model, as well as calibrate the projector with respect to it. And as I mentioned before, the projector is represented as a virtual camera in the scene. To calibrate, we match the points from the chair model in Unity with points on the physical chair, which places the projector and 3D model at the correct distances and orientations from each other. and thus provides an accurately mapped share. So an offshoot of the previous project is a prototype of an interactive projection map dollhouse that we call Lightspace. The process of creating and designing this interactive prototype started with a simple problem. So Wayfair had just opened up this physical store. Was there an experience we could build to drive customers to the store? We wanted to build an experience that would delight users and be approachable to people of all ages, from the parents browsing to the children accompanying the parents, and account for the natural physicality of designing in a space. Projection mapping seemed perfect. We wanted to build a social, collaborative experience, in addition to being interactive with these movable pieces. So we created a projection map dollhouse, which had these 3D printed pieces and a projector mounted on top that would project textures onto the pieces of furniture as well as onto the walls and the floor. Just like a real dollhouse, users could move items in the space. To do this, we used a bottom-mounted webcam and AR markers on the bottom of each item to identify the position, orientation, and ID of each. So for the webcam, which is located on the bottom of that table on that right-hand side, to be able to see these optical markers, we used a glass sheet of acrylic and then placed a semi-transparent vellum on top of it so that it could still be used as the projection map floor. This project had the interesting challenge of being able to balance projection mapping with optical tracking. A commonly known challenge with projection mapping is the need for darkness in order to have better contrast against the light of the projector. However, tracking the codes located at the bottom of each item requires the exact opposite. It needs enough light for the webcam and then the computer vision algorithms which are detecting the codes to be able to detect not only that there's a code present, but also identify the location and identity of each one. We retrofitted that table you see to be able to serve this purpose. We could add lighting underneath the table so that the webcam would be able to have enough light, but we would also trap that light inside the table so that the projection could still be clear and visible. So at this point, we've created an interactive dollhouse that would have projection map textures and movable objects. The final step was to create a means to change these textures. For the entirety of this project, the users naturally designed their room in a screenless space. To continue this tangible experience and avoid context switching, we opted to create a new way to interact instead of just using a screen. By using the NFC wand you see me holding there and tapping on the NFC stickers located on each object, users could then flip through textures specific for that item. For us, this was one of our first forays into designing a new interface with projection mapping that would be more human, more tangible, more collaborative, and even more playful. As an e-commerce company, it might seem kind of strange to experiment with these kind of interfaces, but with increasing want for customization by customers, maybe projection mapping will be more ubiquitous in the future. And who knows? Maybe we'll be able to more easily change wallpapers and customize furniture with projection mapping in the future. So I've talked a little bit about our lab, but in the research sector in general, there have been a number of extremely interesting use cases that showcase so much potential, from new ways to teach and learn to advancements in projection and tracking technology to new ways to experience museums. So the Ishikawa Watanabe Laboratory has a huge number of such projects. Most projection map technology is restricted to static environments and stationary objects, but the project shown here uses a high-speed projector that they call DynaFlash, in addition to a specially created infrared marker, which is shown in the green, invisible to the human eye, but allows for such robust tracking that it works on even deformable surfaces like a t-shirt. So by this exact same lab, Midas projection is a much more recent development in this space. Whereas most projection mapping methods are dependent on either a 3D model of the object or markers, like the optical markers we use for the dollhouse, this lab developed a high-speed surface normal measurement and texturing system. This allows you to projection map on objects that can be static, dynamic, rigid, soft, or even fluid in real time without markers or a 3D model. Real-time content such as this will be the future, and this new technology will help give artists so much more freedom in expressing their vision. So I would like to end on one of my all-time favorite research papers involving projection mapping. Quoting directly from the paper itself, the idea for it is as follows. What would it be like if you could meet someone you admire, such as your favorite artist, scientist, or even world leader, and engage in an intimate one-on-one conversation with them? What this team from USC has done is create a new medium by which you can interact with 3D digital humans based on pre-recorded interviews. For the display technology, they use 216 projectors, as well as a special screen and float light fields in order to display the 3D human. So in the video on the right, you can see the change in perspective as the camera moves slightly to the left and right, just like you would on a physical 3D object. This not only allows for a 3D effect and thus some digital co-presence, but also for multiple users to see different 3D perspectives of the subject in relation to their viewpoint without any glasses or extra headwear. And that's what the term auto-multiscopic on top means. For the interactive component, they've pre-recorded interviews and combined that with an interface so that you can ask questions to the digital person seated in front of you. What I find most compelling isn't the 3D aspect in itself, but the ability to create co-presence and more human interaction with a digital object. Face-to-face interactions are a vital means of communication, and they've enhanced what would typically be a passive watching of a video recording in a museum by adding more interactivity and more human cues like eye gaze and spatial hand gestures that give presence to the interviewee. Imagining technology like this in museums makes me inspired to think about how this could change both the teaching and learning experiences in the future. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me speak. Just like how the glow-in-the-dark stars inspired awe in me as a little kid, I hope some of these projects were able to inspire you to think more creatively about how we interact with technology and get you excited about what's in store for the future. I'll be happy to answer any questions now, but also feel free to email me at any time or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thank you so much again.
Thanks for your presentation, Nicole. A quick question. Lots of interesting use cases there. What do you think is actually likely to be retail? Like just from your Wayfair experience, what's the likely use case that we may see?
So I think in the future, there are so many potential use cases. Obviously, a whole bunch of them are related to the entertainment purposes. So things that would be in the front of the store as like a shop experience or window experience, I think would be the easiest for the consumer to kind of latch onto. And projectors are kind of erring towards the direction of being able to be presented in like bright light and whatnot. So that and some art installations, I think, would be really neat. Some combination of the two.
And do you think that it's realistic that we'll see it, without hardware or with existing mobile hardware, or are we waiting for future hardware to be available before we see these applications?
So I think that the biggest barriers of entry were so far like price, as well as the brightness of the projectors. So the lumen count. And the hardware at this point is reaching the point where it's becoming more and more accessible to consumers, as well as like other things like Lightform and other projection mapping software, which makes it easier for like the average consumer, let's say a shop owner, to be able to then project easily onto their own surfaces as they so wish. So I think it's very, very likely that in the very near term future, let's say 2 or 3 years, these things will be much more available to people.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks again. Those are all the questions we have this morning, and the recording will be available on demand.
Awesome. Thank you so much.